So what is Israel? That is the long and short of my analysis, but for more, stay tuned and click like and subscribe below, and remember to click the notification bell so you know when our videos are coming out. Likewise, follow us on Instagram, link in the description, on our TikTok, link in the description, and become a Patreon. As always, it's best to start with a generic history. It all started with the city-state of Israel, which came about after Abraham left the Mesopotamian city of Ur in 1946 BC. Another important area here is the Philistine states. The Philistine states were later called the Palestinian area by Herodotus in 500 BC, even though they were definitely not Muslims. And the Israelis, the Jewish people, were definitely the more powerful group, having taken over the whole area eventually. The area was then conquered by the Assyrian Empire, the ancient Egyptian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, then the area was free. Then it was conquered by the Roman Empire, then it passed over to the Byzantine Empire, and that's when we get to the Crusades. The Crusades were the Christians trying to take back the Holy Land as the Arabs had taken the land from the Byzantines. This leads us to the Arabic Caliphates. This was the first Islamic influence in the region, and from 632 to 1269 AD, there were many caliphates that covered this area, including the Rashidun Caliphate, the Umayyad Caliphate, the Abbasid Caliphate, the Almohad Caliphate, the Fatimid Caliphate, the Kubota Caliphate, and the Ayyubid Caliphate. The Ottoman Empire then took over until World War I. The Ottomans were Turks and also Islamic. There were very few Jews in this region, and they only started coming back slowly towards World War I as the Ottoman Empire became weaker and European merchants exploited the area. During World War I, there was the infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement between the French Empire, the Russian Empire, and here, most importantly, the British Empire, where they drew another beautiful line in the sand. Palestine was sort of independent, and it was majority Islamic Arab, although Jews were coming back in the droves. After World War II, the UN took over and tried to make it into a safe haven for Jews, particularly after the horrors of the Holocaust. The US obviously had a large role in this, as they were slowly becoming the globe's new hegemon. To run over this, the Arabs declare war on Israel and Jordan annexes the West Bank. Egypt occupies the Gaza Strip in 1949. The Suez Crisis happens in 1956. Egypt nationalised the British and French-owned Suez Canal. This marks the end of British hegemony and the US takes over for full, so Israel has another friend up there, and the US becomes the world's police. Israel briefly occupied the Gaza Strip again. Israel occupied the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Golan Heights and Sinai Peninsula for good. The Camp David Accords then happened in 1978. These were negotiations between Egypt and Israel moderated by Carter in the US, where a devolved political authority for the West Bank and Gaza Strip within a state of Israel was agreed, even though the Palestinians weren't present. And later on, there was a 1979 Egypt-Israel peace treaty, and in negotiations for this, the Israelis put forward the idea that the Sinai Peninsula could become a new Palestinian territory, but this was thrown out as Egypt didn't want to lose the Sinai Peninsula as it was valuable for trade. In 1982, Israel set up a devolved bureaucracy in the West Bank so it could be more responsive to the Israeli intelligence service and military, but at the same time it would look independent. In 1983, Israel and Lebanon attempted negotiations, but the peace treaty flops because Lebanon was having some of their own civil crises at this time. So the Golan Heights stay occupied by Israel. In 1993 and 1995, the Oslo Accords 1 and 2, the first peace treaty to be negotiated between Palestine and Israel since the UN division. The treaty tried to establish a 5-year countdown for a one-nation solution, and it tried to mix up the territories in Israel to establish a Palestinian government, which in the 1994 Gaza-Jericho Agreement would have different levels of sovereignty in areas marked A, B, and C. However, this didn't take off. Perhaps the least tremendous deal of all time. In 1994, Israel and Jordan had a generic, what is basically a normal peace treaty. It wasn't a very good one though, because Jordan is going to pop up again in a minute and is a big culprit in this situation. In 2006, the UN Security Council finally does something useful and makes a ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel in Resolution 1701. The Palestinian National Authority is recognized as an observer as opposed to non-member state in the UN in 2012. In 2017, the Arabs and the Israelis came together in what is known as the Gulf Cooperation Council. Since the 2000s, their sort of animosity had settled a bit, as they united in the best possible way by finding a common enemy with Iran. They then had a conference in 2019 to discuss how bad Iran is. And that is all with history.
I mean, who do you support? I mean, Mark likes Israel, I'm Palestine. Makes it more interesting when you pick a... No?
No. Both Israel and Palestine have committed many atrocities in this conflict, such as the missile and bomb exchange in early 2020. But both sides are fundamentally coming from an honest and innocent position that has just been warped by the ongoing conflict. Israelis come from a position of self-defense, given the historical and international persecution of Jews and Israel being the only Jewish state, while the Palestinians are simply in a fight for self-determination. For both, it's an existential fight, really. So we need to delve deeper and let's look at the basic psychology. Frantz Fanon was a psychiatrist and political philosopher who came up with the idea of othering when in colonial settings. He draws largely from Marx, but in this case mostly from Hegel, in particular his theory of dialectics. In this you have a thesis and an opposing antithesis, and they come together and they create a synthesis. In Fanon's theory, the thesis are the colonizers and the antithesis are the colonized. So when the colonizers, or the people who have settled, in this case the Israelis, assimilate the colonized by incorporating them into a new political system, as they have done with the Palestinians, this creates an existential crisis and an innate aggression in the colonized. In response to this, Fanon would then note the works of Henri Baruk, as anti-Semitic psychoses would happen in return. Anti-Semitic psychoses has more of a Jungian grounding as opposed to Hegelian, meaning it relies on the idea of a collective subconscious or human evolved psyche. This means that Palestinians feel an innate disdain to Jewish people because of the socio-economic differences they face. The second reason the whole situation seems existential and more of a trouble to the people of Israel and Palestine is because the media makes it worse. As shown by this model made by the intellectual Chomsky, elites infiltrate the media process and more extreme headlines come out. Also part of this is the role of education. In education, people are indoctrinated. This is best shown by what sociologists believe a process to be called socialization, where people learn their values. these more extreme values become embedded and breed new extreme values. You also have in democracies and politics in general the process of gradualisation, which is predicted in a theory by the political theorist Lipset. This is where parties appeal to their grassroots bases and they try to catch headlines, therefore each move to the extremes. This is why political parties in Palestine, like Hamas and Fatah, have resorted to extremism in the past, even though Fatah ceased extremism in 1988. But perhaps the biggest reason the situation has got so big is because of geopolitics and international effects. Big actors in geopolitics include the US, Europe, Britain. However, their positions tend to rely more on the political spectrum. Left-wing parties tend to be more pro-Palestine, while right-wing parties tend to be more pro-Israel. The relevant international actors, though, are Jordan, who have a huge population of Palestinians, about 2.1 billion, although they are unregistered refugees. That is 20% of the Jordanian population, a huge part of their economy. And given Jordan is a Hashemite kingdom, which is the same ruling family that was supposed to be the monarchs of Palestine, and Jordan are right next to Palestine, it seems absurd and unhelpful at the least that Jordan haven't given these Palestinians citizenship or political rights. And then perhaps the biggest international actor is Iran. Iran have been funding Hezbollah, a terrorist organisation in Israel, and they have been connected to the militant wing of the political party Hamas, which has also acted as a terrorist organisation. Iran's hatred for Israel is no secret, as it calls the US Big Satan and Israel Little Satan. Iran is perpetuating the conflict, and for any hope of the conflict to end, Iran's intervention needs to be cancelled out. So on the skin of it, it would seem like this is a simple, no, that's my land conflict, give it back. So why wouldn't Israel and Palestine just get together and break some bread over this? That's because breaking bread over something is an Israeli Jewish tradition of Passover, while the Islamic equivalent is the Shura, where they fast. Just a little cultural info bite tied in with a cheeky pun to cheer us all up. Jokes aside, once you've looked through the crazy history, you need to consider these three aspects to truly understand what's going on. 1. The psychology, in particular Fanon's othering and Baruk's anti-Semitic psychoses. 2. The role of the media and the elite through Chomsky's propaganda theory. The role of education and socialization, and the role of politics and gradualisation of political parties. And 3. Geopolitics, in particular the role of Jordan in accommodating Palestine and the role of Iran in thwarting Israel. Taking a purely objective view, perhaps neither Israel or Palestine are the bad guys, and we need to look at other things such as innate human psychology, the role of elites manipulating the populations, and Iran and Jordan. That's all for the time being. Go down below to subscribe to the channel, like this video and click the notification bell, and go check the description below to see our Patreon, our TikTok and our Instagram. See you soon.